So today's presenter is Michelle Terry. Like many bakers, Michelle was inspired by the Great British Baking Show to start decorating cakes in 2017, and she has not stopped since. She also has an Instagram called Shell Bell Bakes, which I will drop into the chat if you would like to check out her Instagram. And now Michelle's going to show us how you can make a cake look beautiful without using fondant. So take it away, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you so much to DC Public Libraries and the Maker Talk series for hosting me. I am very excited to be here and share just one of my many creative hobbies, cake decorating. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Go through a couple slides here first. So today's talk is specifically cake decorating for beginners, not using fondant, but simple techniques that you can use with buttercream or any kind of frosting medium. So just as a quick overview of the topics that I'll be covering today, first I'm going to talk about cake decorating elements, the ways we can have a framework around cake decorating to kind of put together the puzzle pieces of the creative vision that we have for our cakes. Then I'll quickly go through some cake baking and frosting making tips, since this class is specifically focused on the decorating of the cake. I already have the cake made, I already have the frosting made. So I'm not going to go through that in detail in this talk, but I do have some important tips that I want to share. Then we'll move on to the live demo. We'll get to see me decorate a cake and hopefully pick up some great new tips, and then we'll do the Q&A. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Baking has been a longtime hobby of mine, as you can see. These days, I have, as Molly mentioned, my Instagram is Shell Bell Bakes. I've been an amateur cake decorator since 2017, and it really started because I've always been a dabbler, you could say, in many creative hobbies. You know, I think that life is too short to just pick one medium for creative expression. And what is cake decorating but just another one of those mediums? So I enjoy knitting, I enjoy watercolor painting, I'm also a musician, and I want to make these kinds of hobbies like cake decorating simple and accessible, so for all you other dabblers out there to just pick it up. I enjoy sharing my passion through educating about the hobbies because I really do think that anyone can do this. So first, let's start with some cake decorating elements. This cake is not the cake we're going to be making today. However, I think it does kind of demonstrate the way we can break down the elements of cake decorating into a framework that's useful for us to work with. So we can use color as an element, the frosting texture, whether it's smooth or rough, little frosting details like the little piped borders at the bottom of each one of these cake layers, embellishments like sprinkles, something that's not made out of frosting but is kind of small and gives a little bit of a finish, large molded toppers like you see here, and many more, I'm sure, which you can all see in this cake and more. But the key here is you really don't need all these elements for a beautiful cake. You know, these are the kinds of cakes we see on Instagram and in magazines. But what I'm trying to get through with my talk here is you don't need all of that. You can make a really beautiful, simple, sophisticated cake that just makes you go, wow, that's so delicious. I just want to eat that, right? So kind of pulling back a little bit and putting this in the framework of art, you know, we can have, like on this picture on the left side, we can have a painting, for instance, that has all of these little details, very technically skilled, lots of fine detail work in here. Or we can have abstract art where it's, you know, shapes and colors, and this is all art, all of it is. And I think that some of these more abstract techniques where we're working with color and shapes and forms are a little bit more accessible for beginners, especially when we're looking at cake decorating. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking at today. Like I mentioned before, cake decorating is just another medium for creative expression, and it's easy to pick it up. But here, let me share a secret. Here's the best part about cake decorating. You can't mess it up. It is always going to be a delicious, beautiful cake in the end, no matter what. So even if it doesn't come out in the vision that you had originally saw, it's still going to taste great. So don't worry about it. So the image that you see here is an example of how we're going to use color and texture. Just those two elements, none of the toppers, the fine details. That's just what we're going to focus on today. But first, I want to give a couple tips here for sort of prepping your cake and getting to this stage where you're ready to decorate it. So it's essential that you make your cake layers around 4 hours before you want to start decorating your cake, or even better, the day before, to allow time for your cake layers to fully cool. And this is really important because the frosting medium, in particular, I'm going to be using buttercream frosting today. We all know how sensitive butter is to temperature. And if you spread it over a cake that is too hot, it's still hot from the oven, the butter in that frosting is going to melt. And that's actually an example of what I have here of a cake that I decorated maybe a little too quickly. I spread the frosting over the cake. The frosting totally melted. It turned totally liquid. And then it just kind of congealed. And it doesn't look bad. And it certainly doesn't taste bad. It still tasted great. But the texture, you're kind of just limited to that very smooth texture. You're not going to be able to kind of play with it in some of the techniques that I'm going to be showing today. And we also want to be intentional about our textures, right? So very important to let the cake layers cool before putting the frosting on. Another important aspect of cake baking is before you put your cake batter into your pans before baking it, you want to prep your cake pans. So for me, that is spreading shortening on the bottom and the sides of the pan, just greasing the entire pan, sprinkle a little flour in there, tap the pan to spread the flour around. You can turn the pan on its side to get the flour on the side and kind of coat the sides with flour as well. I also take the cake pan and I put it on parchment paper, trace out a circle around the bottom in the parchment paper, and then put that parchment paper in the bottom of the pan. And that has made sure that every cake layer that I bake comes out perfect. It's not sticking to the sides. You don't have to dig it out with a knife. And that's really important for forming our base for decorating. So our sides are nice and smooth. Our cakes are nice and round or square if you're making a square cake. Some optional things that I put here are leveling your cake layers. Because when a cake layer bakes, there's always going to be a dome on top when it's done. And there are techniques for slicing off that dome so we have a nice flat top. I put this as optional because, it does make it nice and flat, but if that's a level of technical detail that is a little bit intimidating, it's fine to skip that because, again, it's your cake. So it's fine it has a dome on top, not a big deal. But if you can slice it off, then especially if you're stacking layers, once you slice into that cake to make cake slices, then those layers will be nice and even. Another technique is applying a crumb coat, which is a thin layer of frosting that you put on the cake and then refrigerate it for 30 minutes before starting your main decorating. And that locks in all the crumbs that are going to be coming off of the cake. And this is particularly useful if your cake is a chocolate cake or has really dark crumbs that are otherwise going to show up in the frosting and get mixed into the frosting. Again, it's optional, kind of an extra step, but consider it if you have a chocolate cake or another cake with dark crumbs. And there are a lot of guides on YouTube for these steps. So I'm not going to go into it into detail here, but just something to consider. Now, here's some tips for frosting. So just to contrast with the previous image that I had before, where the frosting had kind of congealed and made that very smooth layer. Here you can actually see the texture in the buttercream itself. We see those little ridges that are in there that kind of show the way the frosting was spread. And to me, that's an element of the cake decoration itself. So that's something we're going to play with in the demo today. And that's something you can play with when your frosting is of a good consistency. Now, consistency is super important here. And what I found is if you're going to go out and buy frosting for decorating, most frosting at the grocery store is too smooth for the decorating techniques that we're going to be demonstrating today. Now, if you just want a smooth texture, that's totally fine to buy that. And you can, if you get white decorating frosting at the grocery store, you can color it how you want, and that's fine. But it's not going to hold a shape. And you're not going to be able to play with those texture elements that we're showing today. You can, however, buy decorator icing with a medium or firm consistency at most craft stores. So that'll come in like a little frosting tub like you would normally see at the grocery store, but it'll say decorator icing on it, and that's going to have the correct consistency. You can also make your own buttercream frosting, and it's actually pretty easy. Molly, if you could post that link in the chat of the recipe that I use. There's tons of buttercream frosting recipes out there. There's Swiss buttercream and Italian buttercream, and some of them use meringue and eggs and things like that. But the link that that's going to be posted here is the recipe I use. It's very simple. It uses butter and powdered sugar and milk and vanilla for flavor, if you'd like. And the key to success for this recipe is to let the butter sit out overnight to come to room temperature. Before you make the frostings, again, the butter is really the key textural element here. You want it to have the consistency of, say, like soft serve ice cream or something. Something very soft and spreadable before you even start making the frosting. That butter is going to form the base of that consistency, that texture. So, very important step. I have some images here that kind of show what it looks like when you are making your own buttercream frosting from home. You start with the powdered sugar and the butter kind of just mixed together. The more milk you add and the more moisture you add, it starts to kind of come together in little balls of butter and powdered sugar. And I recommend adding the milk gradually, like 1 tablespoon at a time, basically, until it gets to the creamy texture that you want. So, and here is a fairly long supply list. I'm not going to go over every single element. We have some supplies here just for baking and prepping the cake, for prepping the cake pans, for the frosting. But in a little bit more detail, I'll talk about the tools that I'm going to be using today under cake decorating tools. We have your icing spatula. It can be angled like this or flat like this. These just kind of serve different functions. This one that I have here is a little bit smaller to get some more kind of detailed spreading of your frosting here. If you're just buying one, you can just go with the standard angled one. That's good for doing large amounts of frosting on a cake, but you don't have to be super specific with it. Also important is a revolving cake stand. And that's what I have here on the cake cam, and I'll be using today. And this just makes a lot of the decorating techniques that I'm going to show today a lot easier. And I will show that during the demo. Also really important is coloring gel for coloring your frosting. Now, they do sell food coloring at the grocery store, but that's a liquid food coloring. And when you mix that into your buttercream frosting, because it is a liquid, it's going to change the consistency of that buttercream frosting and make it more liquidy than you might want. And it's also really difficult to get vibrant colors with grocery store food coloring. So they sell these little tubs of coloring gel at most craft stores, and that's what I'll be using today. Also, sprinkles. I mean, that's just fun. That's just fun to work with. And there's like tons of really great fun options to find that you can just throw on a cake, and it just adds that little extra layer of pizzazz. So now, ready to move on to the live demo. So here I just had to show off a little bit. This cake here is a wedding cake that I made. It was kind of, you know, the great achievement of cake baking is doing like a wedding cake. And I was very proud of it. And after that, I didn't make another cake for months. Okay, so I've already have a crumb coat on this cake of the white buttercream frosting made using that recipe that Molly linked in the chat. And I have my spatulas here. I have these separate bowls of frosting that I'm going to color. I have two main colors that I'm working with. And then I kind of decided to just reserve some frosting here just in case I want to do a highlight color. So for this cake today, I decided I was feeling like an ocean vibe. So I have two colors. I have royal blue and teal. And just in case, I'm not sure, I might do this later. I have a golden yellow as like a highlight. So let's get started with coloring the frosting. I have a fork just to mix. I made this frosting a couple hours ago, so it's kind of been settling a little bit. So first, let's do the teal. And with this coloring gel, a little bit goes a long way. So we're going to apply it using a toothpick. And make sure you have plenty of paper towels around to wipe up any messes. And also this coloring gel, it really can stain stuff. So I'm going to dip my toothpick in this coloring gel here. And I know that I want my color to be pretty vibrant. So I've got a decent amount here. I'll just wipe it, mix it a little bit into this frosting. And then with my fork, just mix it up. Until it's an even color. Actually, pretty happy with that. I might add a little bit more later once I see how the blue comes out. So for the royal blue, let's grab another fork in here. Grab a separate toothpick. Now this one, I think I want to have a really deep blue color, you know, like the deep blue of the ocean to kind of contrast this lighter teal. So I'll start with this and then see if I need to darken it. That's another thing about coloring frosting. Sometimes if you just let it sit, the color itself will get darker. And I've had this happen before when I've tried to make like a red frosting. And when you first mix it in, it just looks pink because you're mixing it with white. But if you let it sit, you know, in the fridge or something for like 30 minutes or longer, it will really darken. Now, since I don't have time for that right now, and I definitely want this to be a darker color, I'm going to take another toothpick here. I'm going to scoop a big amount of this coloring gel. Now, a little bit does go a long way here. There we go. Now I'm seeing this blue color really come in. All right. I'm happy with those colors. So if you're doing this for the first time, I suggest just picking maybe 2 or 3 colors you just want to experiment with. They can be contrasting colors. They can be similar colors like this. Again, it's your cake. All right, so I think I'm ready to start spreading this around. So since the blue is my darker color, I decided that I kind of want to make that a little bit of a base. I'm going to start with my medium flat spatula here. Since I'm just starting out, I'm not working on any fine details. I'm going to get a decent size here, decent amount of frosting, and just kind of start spreading this in as a layer. And here is where I can show how we might play with texture a little bit. So you can kind of see as I'm spreading it, how the spatula itself is leaving marks in the frosting. And so when I talk about texture, that's what I'm talking about. How we can, we can make it very smooth by taking sort of broad, wide strokes with the spatula. And I'll just cover this in blue so you can see it a little bit better. So again, I'm taking big, broad strokes using the entire side of the knife. Or we can just use the tip of the knife. See how I'm just putting the tip in here. And I can draw, for instance, and I'm moving the revolving cake stand as I'm holding the knife in place, and I'm slowly moving it in, and I can make a spiral. And that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool design. See? Kind of neat. And if I have a smaller one, I can make an even smaller spiral if I want to. So I think that's fun. What's another way we can play with texture? Let's smooth this out again. And since I'm kind of like digging the ocean vibe here, because it's summer, right now I'm just rotating. I'm rotating the revolving cake stand, and I'm just kind of making these strokes in the frosting kind of in the same place. And I kind of got some like waves going on. Here I'm putting my spatula in the frosting and just kind of flicking it up. And see how it's exposing the white underneath? I think that's kind of cool because we're also playing with texture too, or color too as well. So, I mean, that kind of looks a little messy right now, but you get the idea. And this is where you can really just experiment, because if it turns out in a weird way you don't like, you can just kind of smooth it over with more frosting. So now let's take a look at the sides. I know you can't really see it from the camera, but I'll just describe the technique. So I'm scooping a decent amount of frosting here. I'm placing it on the side, and then I'm rotating my rotating cake stand at the same time that I'm spreading it. And I just want to get maybe like a thin layer because I still have all this teal to work with. And speaking of the teal, let's work with that right now. Let's add some of that in right now to play with this color element. And so another key part here is you always want to have your paper towel in hand to wipe your spatula. So it's nice and clean, so that when you put it in your other color, you're not mixing together the colors unintentionally. You can totally intentionally mix the colors however you want, but we just want to be intentional about it. So let's mix these two colors together in the cake and see what it looks like. Since this is kind of my highlight color, I'm starting off with a fairly small amount on my spatula. And I'm just gonna just mix that in. And I'm dragging this with a very light amount of pressure. I'm just kind of letting gravity allow this spatula to stay, because I want to spread this in a thin layer in such a way that the color kind of mixes with the blue underneath. If I put it on with a harder pressure, let's see what that looks like. We kind of get that texture divot in here. Now I'm just kind of mixing the colors together such that they're not entirely distinct. And again, this is all part of the creative process, because I didn't know what this was going to look like before I mix these colors together. And I'm seeing it happen in real time on this cake. And I really like it. I really like these two values of blue together. I think it looks really cool. And another element that I'm seeing here that I'll just point out is we have these areas where the colors are mixing together very smoothly. And then we have these areas where it's a very sharp boundary between those two colors. And I think that those are two other really cool elements that you can work with. Do you want a very solid drop of color, or do you like that? Or do you want something really mixed in and smooth? And now I'm going to work a little bit more on the sides with my teal frosting. Again, I know you can't see it, but just imagine I've already put together the blue frosting on one side, and I'm not being very careful in where I put the blue versus where I put the teal, because that's not my goal in this cake. My goal in this cake is just to play with the color, see where it mixes in, see where it doesn't. I can even just take alternating big giant scoops of it and mix them together. And since you can't see it, I'm going to demonstrate what's going on the side on top. So let's take another big thing of blue here, put it on like this. Now let's grab a big thing of teal, put it like this. And you can see how these are mixing in like really cool ways. This is definitely giving me the ocean vibes that I wanted with this cake. Let me just get another bit of teal here on the side. Oh, this is so much fun. I love these colors. Really like the way this is turning out. I think this is forming a good base of something. Oops, I got some crumbs in here. Guess my crumb coat wasn't 100%, but you know, that's another great thing about cake decorating is, let me grab another paper towel here. It's pretty easy to fix your mistakes, I think, because I can just kind of scoop this out. And then I'll just add more frosting, cover this up. My enjoyment of cake decorating, and you know, that's what you can really call a success in cake decorating if you enjoy it, obviously, is in being adaptable. And you know, I always start out with a vision for my cake, and the cake almost never ends up like that vision, but it ends up like something else that's super cool, and again, super delicious. So I'm looking at this right now. I really like the color. I feel like it might need a little bit of something else though. I was thinking of adding in a bit of, originally I was thinking of adding in like a yellow highlight, but now that I see it as it is, I'm not really into that idea anymore. So I'll just leave that aside. But I do have an extra small bit of white frosting that I reserved. So one thing that I feel like experimenting with right now is I'm just gonna get a little bit of the white and add it in kind of as like a highlight. And then I'm just gonna see how that looks. I don't really have a grand vision for this right now. Again, this is all about experimentation and just kind of creative freedom. Okay, I kind of like that, but this frosting needs to be stirred up a bit because it's separated a little bit while I was waiting. So that's not a big deal. Just mix it up again. Did my spatula go? Here it is. Okay, let's add another little highlight. Ooh, look at that. Look at how that looks. Now I'm using my smaller spatula here. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Because, you know, it kind of reminds me of, you know, like foam on waves. And I don't feel like I need to add a lot of this in here in order to sort of get the artistic effect. Maybe this is like a whirlpool because I seem to gravitate towards just kind of going in a circle on these round cakes. Yeah, that's neat. Ooh, I'm happy with that. Yeah. Now there's one final touch that we can add. And that again is sprinkles. My favorites that I have, and I just got this at probably like a Michael's or something, are these gold stars. And if you go to my Instagram, you'll see I use them on almost every cake because I think they're just such a neat little finish. And this cake is no exception. I'm going to add it to here too. So I've got my stars. Oops. Got my little stars here. And I don't really feel too particular about where the stars are going to go. So I'm just going to, oops, drop them where I think we could use some stars there. Look at that. I know it might be hard to see on the cake cam here, but it's that little bit of gold is just such a beautiful little highlight, a little golden highlight in this ocean cake that I created. So I do have some other smaller sprinkles here, and I'm not sure if this cake needs it, honestly. I'm really happy with the decoration. I thought that, oh, okay, so I'm seeing some spots on the side that I'm just gonna go ahead and add more frosting to, because I have a ton of frosting left over, which is good because it means I didn't run out. So I'm just gonna firm up the sides here. And if you all have any questions, please think about them and please put them in the chat, and I'm almost done with this. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I know I didn't have time to do a demo on the buttercream frosting making process. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that because, that's the medium that we're working with, the artistic medium we're working with. So, it's important to start from a good base. I think I'm just going to add some more texture here. I'm just doing kind of these random strokes on the side. Ooh, I have an idea. I'm going to swoop these up. I know you can't see it, but I'll definitely be posting a lot of pictures of this cake from the top and the side of my Instagram so you can kind of see how this turns out. But I'm going to swoop my knife up, and it's kind of making like a wave pattern on the side. I love that. I love it. I've never done this before. This is a really cool thing. I need more frosting.
You actually do have a lot of frosting questions, Michelle.
Excellent. Yeah, it's important. Okay, I am about done. So what are the questions?
All right, everybody, if you haven't asked your questions yet, go down into the little series of icons at the bottom and hit Q&A, and I'll be reading them aloud to Michelle to answer. So the first question we have is frosting the same as icing?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a very good question, and I know I kind of used those two terms interchangeably, and maybe I should have been more clear about that. And yes, frosting and icing is generally the same thing. I've seen icing also used in specific contexts, like maybe like cookie icing, like for cookie decorating. That's when you would use like a royal icing, which is an icing that dries very hard, and so that's used for cookies. But generally, in terms of just like generic terms, yes.
Okay. Why shortening instead of butter?
You can use butter too. I use shortening because I feel like it's less subject to temperature when you're applying it. I think, 'cause I just apply it with my fingers. And if I were using butter, I think that it would melt. And and again, it's going in the oven. So, it's going to be subject to a high temperature anyway. But the key is when you're putting it in the pan, you want the flour to stick to it before you put the batter in. And so that's like the purpose that the shortening serves, is to get the flour to stick. And if my butter on the side of the pan or the bottom of the pan melts before I get the chance to put the flour in, then it's not really going to serve that purpose. So I think it's a little bit more temperature stable.
Okay. Our next question is about a buttercream struggles. When I made my buttercream, it seemed to get too dense and I used it up too quickly, even though I made many times the original recipe. How can I make it more fluffy with more volume? Thank you.
Yes, I think definitely use more of whatever liquid you were using. I'm assuming this is an American buttercream recipe, like the one I linked, where it's just butter and powdered sugar. So if it's too dense, I think just definitely add more milk, whole milk, if that's what you're working with. Or it doesn't have to be a dairy milk. You can also, I've made frosting with soy milk too. That's also totally fine, as long as it has some kind of fat in it. So yeah, just I think more liquid for sure, more liquid, and maybe mix it longer. But I've definitely had that problem too. And I think the other problem when the buttercream is like way too stiff is you try to spread it on the cake and it like lifts up the cake, and you just like have like a really big crumb problem.
Yeah, it's like when you're spreading butter on toast and it just rips through because the butter's too cold.
That is exactly it though, because it's the same, because it's still butter. You're still using butter as a base. If your butter's too cold, it's going to rip up those crumbs. If your buttercream frosting is all similarly too dense, it's just gonna, it's gonna rip stuff up. So that's what I'd say for that.